Productive Pastor 36, Leading in Strange Times, an introduction. What's going on, friends? Chad's here. It's almost Christmas, almost the holidays. Things are kind of getting interesting. You know, Advent's coming in hot. All the stuff is going on. And I'm about to take a little bit of time off, just take care of some things, to think through 2023 and other stuff. And so this episode's going to be a little bit different because it's the beginning of a short 3-week season that's going to ride us out to the end of the year, talking about leading in strange times. But before I jump into that content, I want to just tell you one thing to do. If you want to engage on the Productive Pastor community, the best way to do that, to make sure you're aware of all the things that are going on, the things that are offered out, the resources, all that sort of thing, is to be part of the email list. I've been getting some emails from folks saying, hey, what about this? When is this happening? This sort of a thing. And I know that they're hanging out in the Facebook community, which is tons of fun, and stuff gets announced and shared there. But email is really where it happens, and they've been missing out on some stuff. But also, every week I send out a pretty specific, more in-depth email, try to make those as actionable and as tactical as I can. And so there's a lot of benefit towards being on the email list and being part of that thing. That way you get communicated with about all the different fun stuff that's going on. So if you're not part of the Productive email list, you can go over to the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/036, and jump on the email list to make sure you don't miss out on all the amazing, awesome stuff that's coming up later on in the new year. So that's the front matter. That's the housekeeping talk, all of that. Let's just kind of go into the main conversation, introducing leading in strange times. So earlier this year, because remember, we've been going strong for almost a year with Productive Pastor being back. And earlier this year, a few months ago, when things started getting heavy, when we knew that, you know, this was busy, stuff was going on, and most of you know this, I switched into bivocational ministry this summer, and this is part of what I do, and I love stewarding this community. And so things were getting a little heavy. I knew, okay, the time has come for focus, the full out, fast bull charge towards just getting this thing up off the ground in a sustainable way is over. Let's start putting some definition around this. And I took the advice of Matt Ragland. He's one of the productivity folks that I pay attention to so much for so many reasons. But I took his advice and I began looking through all the previous episodes, you know, the ideas for episodes I had laying around, the conversations that had taken place in the Facebook community, all those sorts of things. Got every single thing together, and I came up with 4 content pillars. And none of these things were new, but it was the 4 things that seemed to resonate with me and with the community members the most. And I've talked about them in other places, but the pillars are this: personal organization, sermon preparation, strategic leadership, and systems thinking. And so for the last 3 or 4 months, I've tried to keep things not just sorted into these 4 categories, but thinking of the levels of depth and what is an appropriate medium to talk about certain things. So the weekly emails took a different approach, and I spend each month drilling down into one of those pillars. The podcast episodes are a little different, and like I said, I'm taking time off this week to do some more planning because I want to get the podcast organized more as well, and I want a better understanding of just kind of like the tiers of what we do here with Productive Pastor, because this is an awesome, fun thing. It's a necessary thing. It's a helpful thing. And I want to see it grow more so we can all learn together more. But as we tear into the holidays, I wanted to do something a little different, and I wanted to do a quick mini-series. I'm calling it Leading in Strange Times, and share a bit about a couple of things that both live in the strategic leadership and also the systems thinking bucket. Now, I tend to be more interested in these pillars right now, but I also realize that a lot of times folks say that these pillars are a luxury. When I talk with pastors of normal-sized churches, which is another thing that I do almost all day long in coaching conversations, these sorts of things seem to be the idea that only once you get to margin or life seems to be calm can you be strategic, or can you begin thinking in systems and creating these sorts of things? And while this makes sense to me, and I know that my time both in full-time vocational ministry, where I spent 50 hours a week leading a congregation, or now where I spend part of my time shepherding and stewarding two smaller congregations, shepherding and this community right here, but then also my work with Passion and Partnership and a couple of other folks, all of that stuff together. I know that all of that work, even in those scenarios, it's so easy to be just immediately focused on what's the next thing on my schedule, what's the next thing that has to get done, and oh yes, I still have to preach on Sunday. But I think that leaving strategic leadership and systems thinking off as tasks for a sunny day is still a little bit dangerous. In fact, I think it's both through strategic leadership and systems thinking that we are actually able to cause calm. And just by using the phrase cause calm, I'm beginning to find a little bit of internal tension in my own heart, because you see, these last few years for everybody have been chaotic, have been displaced. And I've also been gravitating towards those thinkers that seem to find any sort of clarity inside of the turbulence. And the biggest thing I have learned from them is that any attempt to control or manipulate, in a good sense, not like in a stupid, gnarly, like evil, malevolent sense of manipulation, but any sort of way I can attempt to try to control things back to some idea of known is at best going to be a difficult project, if not actually an unfaithful project. And I've had a few thought partners over these last years, and some of them I've talked about already on the show. But Mark Branson, Alan Roxburgh, Mark Sayers have been ones I've paid attention to the most. And I've also thrown myself deep into the whole Charles Taylor school of thought with the questions around secularism. And really his big question from his book, The Secular Age, about why did it seem almost impossible to not be a Christian in the 1500s and almost impossible to be a Christian in the 2000s. And so kind of going into this is, what does this mean to actually lead forward, to see, to make things happen? How do we do this in a faithful way, period? But how do we do it in a faithful way when every single thing seems to be displaced? A couple of books I've been reading kind of over and over and going back into my notes, and that can't just get out of my head, like they are living rent-free in my mind right now, is the first one. I've talked about it a bunch. It was my favorite book of 2021, Leadership, God's Agency, and Disruption, by both Alan Roxburgh and Mark Branson. It was my first foray into this, and the big idea in this, they called it modernity's wager, was this idea that we can control every single thing we touch. And later on, this past year, I read Alan Roxburgh's other post-pandemic book, and that's kind of a thing for me, is I want to be seeing these things as post-pandemic. How are people writing about this after all the chaos that's happened? But his other book, Joining with God and the Great Unraveling, and it was a kind of an update about a previous book he wrote. But it was fundamental to understand this idea of both congregational and Christian anxiety in our current moment. Roxburgh was one of the major theologians of the missional movement. He engaged the work of Leslie Newbigin and was leading that conversation. But this book almost is a journey of his own deconstructing of what he calls ecclesiocentrism, and the idea of how churches have lost a vision of God's agency. And he talks about this in terms of unraveling. And so both of these two books work really, really well together. Mark Branson also wrote a book that was revised in 2016 called Memories, Hopes, and Conversations, Appreciative Inquiry, Missional Engagement, and Congregational Change. And one of the things that struck me in his writing, and this idea, was the difference between technical and adaptive challenges and leadership. And both of these are about problem solving, which is a thing that, any type of strategic vision, strategic ministry, strategic thought, strategic planning, all that sort of thing is something that I'm deeply, deeply just fascinated with, but also how do we do this and be faithful and not just be manipulating things? That's probably the biggest question I've had in my mind for the last 9 to 10 months. And so Branson's book is a great primer on using appreciative inquiry to talk through these moments when a simple prescriptive answer won't work. And appreciative inquiry is the primary coaching path that I use, especially with my work at Passion and Partnership, but also just kind of pretty much everywhere as I think about this in terms of appreciative inquiry. I've got a blog post on this I'll put a link to in the show notes that's kind of a primer, an idea, a basic idea of appreciative inquiry. But I'm not going to go into it here. Now, Mark Sayers, who's the pastor of Red Church in Australia, and Red Church is kind of from what I understand, is like the last church, I'm using air quotes, he left that comes out of all of Alan Hirsch's missional stuff in Australia back before he was not just a local church pastor. And Mark Sayers is one of the best thinkers that we have inside of the church right now. And he weaves in and out of the idea of technical versus adaptive better than anybody else I have. He does most of this on his Rebuilders podcast. You might know him from his previous podcast he did with John Mark Comer called This Cultural Moment. But what I like about Sayers is we see this power of curiosity and imagination that are a real big, huge part of appreciative inquiry. But we also see him using more modern language. And then he also gets into the idea of prescription once it's time and once it's been contextualized. So he doesn't just live in dreamland, he lives in action land. Dreamland and action land are two of my favorite places to be, but we have to live in both of them kind of one after the other. And so, and if you're still listening, I know this is a weird episode, okay? I get it. This is a weird episode. But what I want to talk about over the next couple of episodes is a bit about the leadership challenges that we're currently facing and how making time to be strategic, one of the most valuable resources we have, could perhaps be some sort of a focus in 2023 for some of us. And I'm going to keep running down these ideas I've learned from these sources, and we're going to get some action items behind it. But I also don't want to leave you with a little bit of homework if you're going to listen to these, just to think about them in turns. I would much rather, you be workshopping something that you're thinking about as you listen to this stuff. I'm excited to see kind of what some threads might pop up inside the Productive Pastor community talking about this. That'd be a cool place to hang out and to kind of work through some of these things. But like I said, I don't want to leave you without a little bit of action thought behind it. And if you've done the 515, if you've done any of the learning cohorts that we've done online, any of the kind of the paid group work that I've led, just a little bit of homework, a little bit of questions goes a long way. And so this is it. Make a list of the things in ministry that are causing you anxiety. It might be the thing that, you or your church just can't figure out. It might be a goal that you've set for 2023 already. It might be a legitimate fear-inducing anxiety, something you say, Chad, I think about this constantly. We just can't get our minds around it. It could be a list of things that you're tempted to try to control. It could be a program where you say, hey, my church really needs to get X going and we can't seem to get it off the ground. But take a few minutes and write down, 2 or 3 or even 5 of them, and let's get into them in the next episode where I talk a little bit about Roxburgh's modernity's wager, this idea that we can control everything, and the temptation that we have in life to see everything as a technical challenge and why that just doesn't seem to work as well right now. So thanks for hanging on. A little bit different of an episode, but I'm excited about it. I'm excited about this conversation, really kind of engaging with these 2 last content pillars that I feel like are a lot more important than we give them credit for. But also as we kind of wind down 2022, as we kind of think through 2023, because I know so many of us are already thinking about things we would like to see done. You might have a priority list already. You might not. You might be in a time of just tremendous change. I know a lot of the folks I know from just coaching conversations, there's a lot of stuff is being disrupted in their own lives and their ministries and their churches right now. And so I think it's a good time for us to just have this conversation about what these 2 things mean and what they can mean to us. So I'm Chad Brooks. It's been awesome talking to you this day. Thanks for keeping me in your ears on your vehicle, however you listen to this over the last 14, 15 minutes. And we'll be back in the next episode, which I'm stoked to talk about. It's going to be a lot of fun. Check out the show notes, and I will see you back next time.